Good day, everyone. My name is Christine Piet, and I wanted to present to you ODSP and learning disabilities. Learning disabilities affect pretty much every aspect of your life. It doesn't just apply to work and education environments. So as we learned in this class and in previous classes, a disclosed learning disability can entitle somebody to accommodations as long as it doesn't cause undue hardship, for example, for employers and for learning institutions. Um, but that doesn't mean that it won't impact things day to day that you yourself will need to make accommodations for. So it's possible that your learning disabilities impact other things such as relationships, reading legal documents, the day-to-day functions of things such as making grocery lists and timing it to take the city bus. So I bring up grocery lists, for example, because even without a learning disability, I had to come up with an accommodation for a partner at one point. I couldn't make him just conventional grocery lists. I ended up taking pictures of the types of things that I needed him to purchase at the grocery store for me so that he could go ahead and spot it when he went grocery shopping, as opposed to reading labels. So this was an accommodation that I did in the day-to-day life. So outside of learning disabilities, impacting your day-to-day activities, having a learning disability can make you eligible for ODSP. Now, what I wanted to bring up in the introduction was that the poverty line for a single person, so a person who is not in a relationship, is $19,930 as of 2011, and those are Ontario statistics. But the average income for a person with learning disability who is on ODSP is $13,032. And in fact, ODSP is the same amount you receive no matter where you live and no matter what kind of disability you have, although as we will see in future slides, ODSP can provide you with some income for one-time purchases and assistive devices. And further to that, when you're on ODSP, your income can go down if you're receiving money from other sources of income. So, for example, if you are eligible for actual CPP for disability or for other reasons, maybe a survivor's benefit of some type, the amount of ODSP you receive goes down dollar for dollar. Beyond that, ODSP is also affected by your family situation, whether or not you are single, in a couple, or have children. So what's on the agenda for today? What we're going to go over is essentially what is ODSP, and we will look at the restrictions, some of the advantages and disadvantages, who qualifies, how do you qualify, preparing a budget based on ODSP. We're also going to look at a case study involving people who are on ODSP. So in order to kind of get a good idea of the what is ODSP, we're going to do an exercise after. So essentially I will ask you to consult an Excel spreadsheet, and hopefully you'll have access to being able to open it, and I'm going to ask you to go and prepare your own budget based on receiving ODSP income. And we're also going to look at applying for credit and just some of the legalese when applying for credit, and just to tie in it all together, we're going to go over a case study. So I keep using the term ODSP, 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 taking for granted that everybody knows what that is. And if you're living in Ontario, you've probably heard of it. It's the Ontario Disability Support Program, and it is the equivalent of social assistance for those with disabilities. So it is designed specifically for those who have a disability, whether visible or invisible. But there is a very long process to apply for it. There's a financial test, like there is for Ontario Works, and there's also the actual disability proof that you need to provide, which will require you to get lots and lots of information from your doctor. And as a lot of you know, sometimes it's actually hard to get a doctor in Ontario, and not only that, your doctors is going to charge you to fill out these paperwork. So in order to get on ODSP, sometimes it's a very frustrating and long process. And because of that, I would have to say that ODSP is not just another handout. So why would you choose ODSP? Well, ODSP is because you are unable to work because of lifestyle restrictions. Maybe you can't do the same type of work because of a learning disability. You have a physical disability, maybe an invisible one, such as fibromyalgia. You just can't see that that person has it. And it's in order to help supplement the loss of work. And that is why you will see that there are some dollar for dollar deductions from other sources of income, because the idea behind ODSP is just to replace some of the income that you would make if you were actually working, if you wouldn't have lost work because of your disability. And so you can apply for ODSP if you have a mental disability, a learning disability such as dyslexia, for example. If you're it's an inability to process information properly, and so that you could apply for it then in that case. It is not a given when you're disabled, even in circumstances in which you are clearly ill, like you have cancer and you're dying, for example. But why would you apply for it if it's such a long process and you need to prove so much, and the amount of ODSP is not very high, as we saw in the previous slides? Well, it's because ODSP is also going to offer vision care, some dental programs, help with medication, help with assistive devices, emergency one-time payment help. As well, and I'm going to give you a few websites that you can consult to get more information about what ODSP really will cover, and some of the advantages of actually enrolling in ODSP. Now, to start, 50% of people who are going to apply for ODSP are going to be refused. There is a tribunal that you can go to in order to try to get that decision reversed. In many cases, it is successful, oddly enough. But yeah, there is a 50% decline on applications for ODSP. And in one of the YouTube videos I watched, there was actually a comment that said that about 25% of the people who are on Ontario Works long term are possibly people with hidden learning disabilities and mental illnesses who should be on ODSP instead. So I think that it's quite possible that a lot of people who are on Ontario Works, and Ontario Works does offer, it's significantly less than ODSP, even though ODSP isn't much to begin with. Those people may actually have hidden learning disabilities and may have been frustrated with the ODSP application and decided to not go that route. So ODSP was created really and separated from Ontario Works because it is made for those who want to work but are unable to right now. And ODSP does have a whole back to work career aspect to it, but there was not a lot of effort, according to some of the things I've read, put into creating this career plan and job market program with ODSP recipients. Now, myself, I actually did do a mock application for ODSP, and it took me about 30 minutes to do, but I didn't actually double check any of the numbers that I needed in order to apply. I kind of just went through it quickly, just to kind of see what it would be like. And the overall impression that I got from it was that, my gosh, it is long. It is a long process. There were some things I actually didn't understand, and doing it online, and I felt like the documents that they required was a little bit heavy, too. There's actually a lot of options when you select certain sections of the ODSP application, and some of them were confusing to me too. So I couldn't imagine maybe having the type of learning disability where you have dyslexia and trying to do this application online. I definitely want to do it in person with someone, and sometimes if you're shy, for example, it's a little bit harder to do that. So who's applying for ODSP? Well, who receives it right now? It's about 77% of people who are single on ODSP. Then there's about 9% of them who are single with children. 18% of the people on ODSP have a post-secondary education. 30% of them are high school grads. So as we saw in the previous slides, ODSP, if you're a single person, is about $1,000 a month. And for that $1,000 a month, you are, in my opinion, working really hard to keep it, and to try to fit into managing $1,000 a month to make ends meet. There are a lot of restrictions when you're on ODSP. The amount of income that you make, for example, what sources of income you get it from, how much money you have in the bank, what they expect for you to cash in before you can go on ODSP. It's very constraining, and oftentimes ODSP caseworkers will say that ODSP is supposed to be a measure of last resort, meaning that you've gone and you've depleted all other sources of income or tried everything else before going on ODSP. And in my opinion, that's just insane. They're basically asking you to cash in your RRSPs if you have them, to use up all the money in your bank account before you can start receiving this regular source of income. And I understand that it's probably to help limit the amount of abuse there is of it, but at the same time, you know, asking somebody to empty out their bank account before they can start receiving a regular source of income is a little sad, because as we see, ODSP is just not enough to cover day-to-day expenses, and you'd be depleting the funds that you have in your bank account anyway, in my opinion. So I find ODSP makes you feel like you have to try to make money under the table to prevent your ODSP amount from getting cut. So that's probably where, you know, we hear a lot of people on Ontario Works or on ODSP making money on the side or under the table because they don't want to have to declare it. They don't want to have to cut how much do they receive from ODSP. They're just basically trying to supplement it in any way that they can. What's the struggle? Well, the struggle when you're on ODSP is that no matter where you live, you get the same amount, whether it's in Toronto or here in Cornwall. No matter how much you pay in rent, you will receive the same amount of ODSP as well. So if I can find an apartment at $350 a month, well, lucky me. But at the same time, many apartments rent for $700 a month. And if you're receiving $1,086 a month, that's eating away a large amount of what you receive, forcing you to probably make some type of lifestyle change. You know, moving would be required, moving in with someone, and actually moving is something that you have to report to the ODSP office, and they may end up reviewing everything at that point anyway. So what I wanted to kind of go over was that ODSP, as we saw, if you did take the time to look at the slide from SlideShare that I provided, it's $607 for your basic needs and $479 for shelter. And when you do the math there, the total amount that you get per month is about $13,000 per year, and the poverty line in Ontario is $19,000. From there, if you're working minimum wage, actually $11 an hour, 35 hours a week, then you're actually making about $19,000. So even if they're saying it's a measure of last resort, even if you were working minimum wage, you'd still be making more than what ODSP is offering you. So I still don't see how they can expect you to be living off of it. When you're on ODSP, you are able to work, but only about 11% of the people on ODSP are also working, and it's mainly part-time that they are working. Part of the difficulty there is that the idea behind any type of disability insurance, whether it's through work or insurance purchased to protect a loan, for example, is that the idea is you shouldn't be receiving more in disability than if you were actually working. And if you do decide to work when you're on ODSP, as we saw in the previous slide, it's about 11% of people who are working about part-time when they're on ODSP. There is a deduction, so 100% of what you make gets cut from your ODSP. but minus $100. So you kind of have like an incentive there to work. They let you keep $100 of the type of work that you did. So you can see why somebody would only really be aiming for working part-time. Um, and further to that, when you're on ODSP, part of the other effort involved, even though you're trying to work, is that you do have to document everything that's happening. You have to document your disability. You may have to provide them with new forms every year confirming your disability. Um, and you know, if ODSP made a mistake when they did your ODSP form, or when they started giving you income supplement from ODSP, so that if you receive too much money one month, they can deduct it later months. So, you know, one month you may think, oh, okay, this is nice, I got a little bit of extra money, but you have to beware, because in the months that follow, if they give you too much, they'll maybe take off $50 per month in order to pay themselves back what they gave you too much of. And also, you need to remember, when you're on ODSP, things like cash advances and loans count towards the income you receive, causing deductions from how much ODSP you receive as well. So not only would you need to pay back the cash advance, but that actually counted as income that you know, and you're going to get it deducted on your next pays. It was not easy to find a pay slip from ODSP, but I was able to finally find one off of a website, and this was an individual who decided to post what they were making on ODSP because they were trying to fight something with their student loans. Anyway, I went and I grabbed it, and what I like about this is the basic needs and the shelter costs are broken down, so you do see both. And because it's not the basic amounts, we can assume that this is a family. Although on the pay itself, it doesn't say how many family members there are. And you'll also see that there is a deduction for CPP disability pension, and that was a dollar for dollar deduction. And so what ODSP does is it provides you with the difference between what you should be entitled to if you're on ODSP minus any income you have now. So they're receiving $157 from ODSP, which essentially means that if we look at the total that they would have been making had they been just receiving money from ODSP, it's about $20,544 that they're receiving for a family. Here I invite you to pause the video so that you can start working on an exercise. Refer to the cash flow handout sheet that I have provided you, and just go ahead and make yourself a budget. Hopefully you'll see that it's very easy to do. Make yourself a budget based on the single person amount that ODSP provides you. If you have a moment, I invite you to go onto YouTube to take a look at the two videos that I've posted here. They are really good perspectives on what it's like to be living on ODSP. So let's talk a little bit about how all of this ties with actually having a loan. Because the point of my presentation was to talk a little bit about ODSP and to explain why, you know, how this fits in with applying for credit, and why, as a financial advisor, I wanted to get more information about this. So let's start with the section applying for credit. Basically, when you are on ODSP, money received from loans, whether it's a mortgage, a payday advance, or a cash advance, it can count towards your total amount of allowed assets. So if you looked at the slide by the ODSP Action Coalition, they do indicate that as a single person you can have up to $5,000 in assets. You can own a vehicle, you can own your own home. But then if you go ahead and you borrow money and you leave it in your bank account, for example, that now is an asset. And also, they talk about how a payday cash advance counts towards income received for the month. So, on top of that, applying for credit is probably very hard to qualify for a conventional loan when you're single, because if anybody's ever applied for a loan before, you'll know that technically the total amount of obligations you have, including rent, can't be more than 42% of your income. And so if you make about $1,000 a month, well, not more than $420 of what you make can be used to pay for your rent and car loans, etc. So essentially, the moment you have rent to pay and you make $1,000 a month, you wouldn't qualify for any loans at all, which then forces someone on ODSP to borrow from high rate sources such as credit card and payday loans. So those aren't very interesting options, and it's very important to kind of what your options are if you are deciding that you need to apply for a credit and to finance projects that you have. When I first decided that I wanted to look at ODSP and what your responsibility is as a financial advisor when doing a loan, for example, I really thought that there would be something clear cut, that there would be there'd be documents about how it is important to make sure that the person who's signing documents understands what they're signing. But after looking into it quite a bit, I've come to the conclusion that there is actually nothing out there that makes me as a financial advisor, or I suppose even a lawyer or a doctor, responsible for the person who is signing a document in the end. I mean, there are rules you need to follow if you get somebody who's blind, for example, to fill out a legal document. You need to make sure that they basically sign that somebody has read this out loud to them and that they understand. There's nothing like that for learning disabilities. And so, like we saw in the class, you need to, as a person who has a learning disability, disclose that information. You don't even need to say that. You basically need to say, "Hey, could you explain to me what I'm signing here?" Because, hey, there is a lot of paperwork involved in doing financing, and I'll add a few slides of how much paperwork there is. Yeah, so the responsibility ends up being on the person who is signing the document to make sure that they understand. Now, even though there's nothing that says that I need to make sure that they understand documents, if they do ask me for clarification, I need to make sure that I'm not misrepresenting what they're going to be signing, because there definitely is something in law for misrepresentation when having somebody sign documents. As a rule of thumb, an educator can kind of like cater to the lowest denominator in their class. So basically, teach the class as though there are people in the classroom who won't understand the way you're presenting it. So like provide visuals, handouts, etc. And the same principle can apply to when you're in an office with someone. So in this case, although it is the responsibility of the person who has a learning disability to disclose that maybe they don't understand right away what they're signing, it I can also, as a financial advisor, take the time to illustrate things. It is important for me as a financial advisor to maybe kind of like draw it out, because there are some concepts that aren't as easy to grasp if you're just hearing about them out loud. You're throwing numbers in somebody's direction. So overall, I would say that when it comes to meeting with somebody who has a learning disability, if you don't know, well, I suppose the default position you can take on presenting to them legal documents is just going over them and asking them, do you understand? Or do you need any clarification? But apart from that, if somebody signs it, no matter what they're whether or not they understand what they're reading, that's not really my responsibility to try to guess that. It really is their role to explain that they need some help or some extra guidance. So once again, I invite you to pause the video in order to consult the information I provided as a handout for the case study. So you'll see on that sheet there's not only the case study, but on the next page there are some questions attached to it. So I wanted to conclude with the following. ODSP is not as easy to collect as we think. And the max that you get if you're on ODSP on your own is 1,086 for a single person. And in my opinion, and I hope after completing your budget you see the same thing, I just don't think it's enough. It's just not enough to live off of. Having a learning disability can qualify you for ODSP, especially if it's severe enough to affect the way that you live and your ability to get work. And if you do have a learning disability, it's still important to understand what your responsibility is being learning disabled. And finally, it's not enough to plead ignorance, to say that you don't understand what you're reading or what you read. If you don't understand, you need to make people aware of it, because when you sign a contract, it is binding and oftentimes it is final.